Hey friends, welcome to My 123 Cents, the podcast. This is episode 507. Thanks for watching and or listening on your favorite podcasting app or on youtube.com/My123Cents. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button wherever you're listening or watching. And joining me this week is Chad Smart. And Chad, we are going to be taking a fun little trip down SummerSlam lane, if you will. We're going to talk about this past SummerSlam, but we're also going to incorporate elements from previous SummerSlams and just wrestling in general. But first of all, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. It's been a long week in the past week. I think I've averaged getting to bed around 1 o'clock in the morning. And even after watching SummerSlam the night before we recorded this, I finished it at 12:30. And so I'm getting about 5 hours of sleep on average. So I feel great. This should be a very coherent and non-rambling episode.
Well, it has been a long week. And, you know, I can remember back, you and I are old enough to remember the very first SummerSlam in 1988. We were both in high school by that point. And I know you were watching by then, but did you watch the first SummerSlam?
No, because back then it was on pay-per-view, and like I said, until the Attitude Era, the only pay-per-view that I bought was WrestleMania 5.
Mm. I can remember being in the locker room for gym class the next day because it was on a Monday that first year, and somebody that was talking about it, I wasn't necessarily friendly with them, but I overheard them talking about it, and they said, to me, the big takeaway from the event was the Honky Man losing the Intercontinental Championship, because I was a Honky Tonk Man fan. I was like, who in the world beat him? And so then I found out it was the Ultimate Warrior, and I later watched it on cassette. But back in the day, we were talking before we hit record. We have some issues with Peacock, but really, if you think back in the day, we were maybe delayed a little bit in our viewing last night or over the weekend as we're recording this. But back in the day, you would have to wait for a friend to bring it to school the next day or later in the week. And when I was in college, my parents would record them on pay-per-view, and then they would mail the cassette tape to me that way. So, but this was back before there were spoilers. So a lot of times you were genuinely surprised when you were able to see that stuff. So,
yeah, but I thought you were going to say your big takeaway from the first SummerSlam was Miss Elizabeth taking off her skirt.
Yes, that was. I remember that being quote unquote controversial at the time, but geez, Louise, 10 years later, look what they were doing at SummerSlam. So, where do you rank SummerSlam as far as overall pay-per-views? Because a lot of people compare it now, especially, and I think, is it next year they're going to go to the 2-night format for SummerSlam?
I think 2026 is the first announced
2026
2-night, but I would not be surprised if. What's that?
Minnesota.
Yeah, in Minnesota, but they haven't announced where 2025 is, and I would not be surprised to see 2025 go to 2 nights.
Is it necessary, do you think?
Based on last night's show, no.
Right.
And based on WrestleMania's, I don't think I think 2 nights is too much.
Yeah, and I want to get more into that too as we discuss this. And I cut you off on your first question. But what's your overall impression of SummerSlam, ranking amongst the big four?
The big four, I would probably put it at number 3. I mean, obviously WrestleMania is going to be your number 1. Royal Rumble, I think, has the spectacle to be the number 2. The Royal Rumble match, and then I would put SummerSlam. And I think you and I have talked about it before on the podcast, and we have a difference of opinions. Survivor Series, I like the concept of the Survivor Series match. I just think they go on too long, and when you have an entire show full of that type of match, I'm not a fan. But I do think there should be a traditional Survivor Series match at every Survivor Series.
Yeah, and that's where you and I differ. I would SummerSlam has always been my fourth on that, just based on. But again, those first 5 years of Survivor Series are my favorite years because they were all dedicated to the concept and whatnot. But so let's talk a little bit about dual nights, double nights on pay-per-views, because as I was watching last night, there were only 7 matches, no tag team matches. So, really 14 superstars in there, getting to wrestle. Now we saw R-Truth and The Miz and Dominic Mysterio at ringside, and obviously all the Bloodline members coming out, and then eventually the rest. And we'll talk about that as we go through the show. But I'm like, wow, there's no Rey Mysterio here. There's no Randy Orton isn't wrestling, and Kevin Owens isn't wrestling, and the and I know
And there's no Yeet.
no Yeet. I know there are some folks out with injuries and whatnot. No Jade Cargill or Bianca Belair. No tag team title matches. And I think part of the advantage of SmackDown being on Friday nights and moving the PLEs to Saturday is you almost feel like it's already two nights, because you got the big title change on Friday night with the tag team titles, and you were able to kind of, with WrestleMania, it's three nights because they do the Andre the Giant. I don't think they did it this past year, but in the past they've done the Andre the Giant Battle Royal at SmackDown. So I don't know. What are your thoughts? Does everybody, again, we get into that whole participation trophy mode of, does everybody have to wrestle at WrestleMania? Are you less of a superstar if you don't wrestle at SummerSlam or at the Survivor Series, at these big four events?
Yeah, no, not everybody has to be on the show, and not everybody has to be champion.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that one of the biggest problems now is the amount of filler on the shows, and that's my biggest issue. And especially being on Peacock now, because Peacock has the ad-supported tier that you can subscribe to, they would be like, oh, if you're a Peacock lower tier member, you're going to get a commercial now. If you're a premium subscriber, then you'll see the background package for the next match. And because I didn't time it out last night because I was kind of fast forwarding a bit, but I would say that between the end of the I'm trying to think what match happened before Cody and Solo, but between the end of that match and this,
it was the title match. It was
was it Damian and
Gunther?
And Gunther. Okay. Between the end of that match and the start of Cody and Solo, it was probably a good 30 minutes, counting the entrances and post-match celebration for Gunther. But, I mean, on the one hand, when you're there live, it gives you a chance to go to the bathroom or get something to eat. But when you're watching at home, it's just like, okay, let's get on with the show, especially when you're watching late at night. And thankfully I could fast forward through a lot of that. But yeah, I think there's too much filler on the show. I don't think there needs to be and I think the two nights also, just because the shows are still like 4 hours long.
Yeah.
And you get there early to, mill around outside, and and I mean, we're old. So if we were in our 20s, it might not be so bad, but sitting in a stadium for 4 hours on back-to-back nights is not my idea of a good time anymore.
I'd be curious to know too what percentage of people go to both nights of WrestleMania. I know we did it back at 39. I'm curious to know, and if you're listening or watching and you've been to the dual night of WrestleMania, let us know. Do you go both nights, or do you just attend one night, or with SummerSlam coming up? It's funny because when we were younger, it's like, man, I wish wrestling was on more and we had more, and now it's like literally you can find, well, now with not even counting the streaming available out there, or YouTube for that matter, but just with having basic cable, you could almost every night of the week have something wrestling related, especially now with the WWE and A&E doing the biographies and all that on Sunday nights. AEW's pay-per-views happen on Sundays, but then Monday with Raw, Tuesday with NXT, Wednesday with Dynamite, Thursday with TNA, Friday with Collision and SmackDown, and then Rampage, I'm sorry, and then Saturday with Collision. Yeah, there's literally there's, I don't want to say too much, because again, you can pick and choose and watch what you want. And I think younger me would have been obsessed with trying to watch it all, but now 50-something me is like, okay, it's on, cool. Social media, I can watch the highlights. I did watch SummerSlam live, which usually I try to watch the big four live as they're happening, which with them being on Saturday nights, and this is kind of we don't go out every weekend, but, and I told my wife, I said, because she's like, what are we doing this weekend? And I said, well, we don't have plans with our friends. I said, SummerSlam's on. I would like to watch it, but if something comes up, I'm not going to lose sleep over it. I can watch it when we get home, or I can watch the highlights on my phone. I wasn't, but we ended up staying in, and I watched, and she sat on TikTok, and our other friends were like, well, did she make fun of you while you were watching? And I'm like, no, she didn't, because she's doing her thing, I'm doing my thing. And
Mm.
my pet peeve, in addition to the commercials and the packages, and it stretching out the show and adding to it, would be with Peacock last night. For the first time I've ever noticed this,
Mm.
I'm 3 hours and 50 some odd minutes into this show that I'm watching live. And the little thing pops up that says, do you want to continue
Mm.
watching the show? And I'm like, well, yeah. Well, I had done laundry earlier in the day, and I'd brought the clothes out to fold while I was watching. And I had stacked everything apparently on top of the remote, and I could not find it. And so this is literally, uh, uh, Jacob Fatu had just done the spot. And
Mm.
I'm like, I know what's coming by this point. When they said it was going to be Bloodline Rules, I knew it was
Yeah.
coming. We'll dive more into this in just a few minutes. But anyway, I'm like scrambling for the remote. I lose the feed. I finally find the remote. I open it back up to Peacock. Well, usually when you open it up, it's right there. Well, the first thing there was the Olympics. And I'm like, well, no, I
Mhm.
don't want to watch the Olympics. So I scroll down a couple of notches and I see SummerSlam. So I click on it. Well, then a 30-second ad pops up. Then it starts with Kid Rock. And I'm like, what the hell is this? It was SummerSlam 2023 from Detroit. And I'm like, ah. So I exit out. By the time I get back to
Yeah.
it, the damage is done and Roman is standing. And I'm like, so I felt cheated out of that moment.
Uh,
I'm watching live because I don't want spoilers, and I want to. There are sometimes I like to sit and enjoy and watch the show, and I'm like
mhm.
almost 4 hours into this, and Peacock decides to ask if I'm still interested in it.
Understood.
I'm like, it's a live show. So anyway,
Right.
that's my
Yeah,
opening.
that is, I mean, I get why they ask because Netflix does the same thing if you stay on the same channel for too long. But yeah, if it's a live program, there should be some way for the program algorithm to understand you're not
Yeah,
just binge watching episodes. But
right.
I had the same thing when I got home last night because similar to you is that I didn't even tell my girlfriend that SummerSlam was on yesterday until yesterday afternoon when I went to her place. And then
Mhm.
because weren't doing anything, we were just sitting around and she was on Instagram, scrolling through her phone. So I just pulled it up and started watching on my phone and ended up watching the first hour and a half before went out to eat. And when I got home, I'm like, okay, the show's over. Let me try watching. And I clicked on the SummerSlam thing, and it's like, oh, this program is not available. I'm like, ah. So exit back out, and same thing where it was not on the main page. So I go into the WWE sub forum, and there's like SummerSlam right at the top. So I'm like, sure, start it, hit fast forward because again, I've already watched the first 90 minutes. I don't need to rewatch,
Right.
and it's Ricochet versus Logan Paul, and I'm like, wait, what? And then yeah, that's when I realized, oh, it's 2023, but
We did the same thing. It's funny.
old men and technology, I
Yeah.
tell you. But yeah, and like I said, I told you before we went on the air that the show ended around 7:35 Pacific time, but it wasn't until 10:30 that a replay went up. And that's like I could have watched the entire show almost in that time that it took them to put a replay. And to me, a replay should go up probably within a half hour
Right.
of, because you're recording it as long as they don't have to make any major edits for, if you have a missed camera angle or if, something gets on air that shouldn't, but you should be able to, as soon as it's over, hit the processing button, render button, make the file and upload it to the server.
Right. Well, and you and I have watched, and this is going to probably be the only AEW comparison talk that I'm going to do. We've both watched AEW pay per view together. You've been to an AEW
Mhm.
pay per view before. Uh, you know, I think we've talked and noted before on this podcast that it's like all action, 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 action. They don't
Yep.
really break it up and do. WWE, we feel like does a little bit too much of the packages, and obviously now with you don't become a multi-billion-dollar company by not selling ads and ad space and all that good stuff. And there's got to be a happy medium somewhere, though,
Right.
don't you think? As far as like the action versus the kind of
Yeah.
like the R Truth moment last night was, and the Jelly Roll. I think that was
Yeah.
kind of the popcorn moment, if you will, to
Yeah.
go to
And I think,
the bathroom.
and I think the difference right now is I think I pay like $5.99 for Peacock,
Mhm.
whereas, and I get the PLE as part of that package, whereas an AEW pay per view is costing me $50. So if WWE wants to put 50% of their show being ads or recap packages, am I still getting my value in the wrestling? Yes.
Right.
If AEW wanted to do 50% filler, would I be upset? Most likely, because if I'm shilling out 50, but I've never walked away from an AEW pay per view, even some of the lackluster ones over the last year. I always felt like I got my money's worth. Like there's
Right.
enough, and granted, it may be too much.
That was going to
I
be my
think for
next
the price.
question. 7 matches at SummerSlam,
Yeah,
14 wrestlers wrestling, if you will.
yeah,
Uh, AEW, I know, has a tendency to stack the card, and
yeah.
again, you're getting quality matches and shows and whatnot, but uh, that comes down to that mentality of, does everybody have to be on every pay per
Mm-hmm.
view or PLE in the case of WWE?
Well, and I'm just to compare, the very first WrestleMania had 10 matches.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that was probably a 2 hour pay per view. I don't think there were 3 hours at that time.
Yeah.
So, which is another, I mean, granted, Ultimate Warrior and Honky Tonk Man went 31 seconds according to Wikipedia, but the other factor is that
And you
matches,
said
I think,
SummerSlam earlier. You said the first WrestleMania. You meant Summer.
yeah, SummerSlam, yeah. But that's the other factor with shows today is that matches, I think there needs to be better variance in match length.
Mm-hmm.
I know last night Braun Breaker and Sami Zayn, I guess, apparently only went about 6 minutes, which is short by pay per view or PLE time frame, even by weekly show time frame nowadays, where everything has to go through a commercial break. But um, yeah, every match doesn't need to be 15-20 minutes long. Main events don't need to be 30 minutes, especially with and we'll get to it. We talked about the main event, especially with what they have done with the bloodline over the last 2 years. Like to me, the first 95% of the match is meaningless because you're just waiting for that last 5% that's going to matter.
Right. Yeah. All right. Well, let's get into the show. And again, we're just kind of talking and throwing out a few thoughts, comments, and I will have some instances where we're comparing and contrasting to previous shows. Um, Opening up with the women's championship match, and let me ask you this too. Not trying to be controversial or woke, if you will. Do you ever think that we'll see a day with any company where you get 5 women's matches and 2 men's matches versus 5 men's matches and 2 women's matches?
The In WWE, I think a lot needs to change because they don't seem to, even though they are putting more of a focus on the women's match over the last 5 years or so.
Yeah.
But the fact that the women's tag team match was saved for SmackDown and kind of hit last night that because SmackDown is in the same city as SummerSlam, like it is kind of a 1.5 nights
Yeah.
show. So you want to load up, but um, but it seems like if you're not in the title match, your story isn't as prevalent or important. It's not. It's just kind of like, oh, you're in a story, but you're not really doing anything.
Yeah.
Whereas I think in AEW right now, I believe the last pay per view had with the pre show, I think there were 3 women's matches and 27 men's matches because why not? But no, I mean, I'm not going to say it won't ever happen because it could, but I think there's still the mentality that women's matches are still kind of an attraction,
Mm-hmm.
but they're not like a bra and panties attraction anymore. So slowly, so given the process of women's wrestling, yes, in 40 years, we should see maybe more women's matches than men.
That'll be episode 600 or 6,320. podcast that we'll review that on. Uh, the other thing I wanted to ask you about, too, or
Mhm.
make note of, I guess not really necessarily ask you about,
Yeah.
was you kind of hinted at it, but 6 of the 7 matches were championship matches. Only one non-title match, and probably one of the more intriguing matches of Drew McIntyre versus CM
Mhm.
Punk. And we'll get to that in a couple minutes. But Liv Morgan, women's champion versus Rhea Ripley. Rhea's got Dom in her corner. Had been hints and allegations that well, not allegations. We thought Liv was actively trying to get with Dominic.
Mhm.
I think we all kind of knew where this was going to go. At least I pretty much anticipated that Dominic was going to somehow screw over Liv more or uh, Rhea Ripley
Um,
throughout the course of this, uh, and that's exactly what happened. Now, do you know, was Rhea Ripley legitimately injured while she was out, or was this all just part of the story to get the belt off of her and kind of build this story between?
from what I have read, yes, she was legitimately injured.
Okay.
Which why they took the title off of her, given the way wrestling, there is no 30-day
Mhm.
defense clause anymore in wrestling. So why they had to take the title off, I don't. Other than, I mean, it helped the story,
Yeah.
but yeah, I think she was legitimately injured. And during the match, I was also like, because she did the dislocated shoulder
Yeah.
bit, and I was, there, and I mean, it did look for a moment like there was, her shoulder did look kind of out of place. So I don't know if that was just really well done or if
Yeah.
there
I
was some
was
issue
like,
there.
what is she
Um,
doing? Uh,
um, real quick, I'm going to tangent off of this for a second because you know you and I again have been watching wrestling for way longer than we really want to admit because again we're old, but this had the shades of drawing a complete blank on what angle this had been done in the past, but let's just say an angle like this had been done previously.
sure.
When you get to Seth refereeing Drew McIntyre and um, CM Punk, which was shades of SummerSlam '97,
Yeah.
which they hit to. As wrestling fans now, we know that we have that comparison.
Right. Right.
Had they done that at SummerSlam one, it would have been like pulling an angle from 1962, I
Right.
think 62, 64, somewhere in there. That seems like a long time
Right.
as opposed now, but at that time too, we didn't have the access to go back and watch all that stuff. So, do you think fans comparing it to those previous angles is because they've watched it for so long, so it's still fresh,
Mhm.
or is it because of the access to this footage? You can say like, oh, this is similar to this, and if people want to go back and watch, like, it seems like time frames are much more. I don't want to say smaller, but like something that happened 30 years ago feels as fresh now as it did
Right.
when it happened. So it doesn't seem like there is that gap in time. So I wonder if that also played a factor in anyone besides myself's opinion of watching the show and knowing what to expect.
No, because I think that's why I knew in my heart of hearts that Dominic was going to turn on Rhea, and I think that there is
Mhm.
a population, probably anyone over the age of 35, probably felt that way too. Whereas the younger, especially
Mhm.
kids and
Right.
people in their early 20s, this was all probably fresh and new to them, and probably had no idea. And I know what you're talking about angle wise, and I can't think of what angle it was either. But I think that has happened several times. There's always been
Mhm.
that kind of love interest thing, and then
Yeah.
one turns on the other. Maybe it was Trish and Chris Jericho and Christian.
Maybe.
Uh, I know that happened at WrestleMania 20, for example. So you
Mhm.
know, it has played out. We have seen, or it has happened before. We have seen it before, but with different players and getting to it differently kind of helps with that. And I was in such a nostalgic mindset, and
Mhm.
maybe I'll save this comment for when we get to the Intercontinental title match, but which ironically is next. But you know, uh, I did not expect Rhea to walk out with the championship. Although, and again, here's the part where we were talking on the phone before we started recording this show. Of our expectations, by our I mean fans in general, versus what happens and what WWE or AEW for that matter or TNA has in mind for their storylines, and when it doesn't meet our expectations, we get disappointed as fans. Um, I would not have been disappointed if Rhea would have ended up beating Liv and winning the title and walking off in the sunset with Dominic. But the story dictated something different. And Rhea Ripley right now is my favorite on the female side of things. And I don't think she needs the belt necessarily. And I think that it's going to be an interesting story moving forward, especially as we get further into the card of Judgment Day. It kind of felt like the show was a little bit Judgment Day centered, which I liked. It was different from what we get so much with the Bloodline. So I'm curious to see where things go. But I didn't mind the recalls, the flashbacks, if you will, in the Drew match. I'm sorry, yeah, in the Drew and Punk match, and then with this one as well. So it was something different, and Dominic kind of living up to that nasty dirt bag, and I think Pat McAfee even called him a piece of shit. So, it was interesting to see because I do think that the reactions from the commentary team helped sell that match. It helped add that emotion to the match that fans at home were watching.
Yeah. Again, I watched the first three matches without audio up because I was watching on my phone, so I didn't hear the reactions. But I thought the match itself was fine. I think the other problem with the show in general is that predictability factor, which again, predictability is not a bad thing if a story is told well. But to me, a lot of the outcomes or endings just came off flat. Like I didn't really feel like Dom helped Liv like in a very overt way. It was just kind of like, oh, I'm going to put this chair in, and then she's just going to use it. It wasn't. There was really no like hinting of he was screwing Rhea out of the match. If that makes sense. It just like kind of happened, and then Liv and Dom start making out.
Yeah, I think it could have been a little more blatant, but I think with him stopping her from using the chair, kind of planted that seed, and then you knew, okay, something's going to happen here. The other thing with that, as you were, oh yeah, because you said you weren't watching on audio, so I'm curious because I'm wondering what the fans at home or in the audience thought without the commentary, and when Rhea just kind of slams herself into that commentary table to pop her shoulder back in, I'm like, what is she like? Is she trying to make it look like Dominic is attacking her? Because the referee's back was turned at that moment too. But it wasn't until the commentary team said she's popping her shoulder back into place that I'm like, okay, that makes sense. So what did you think seeing that? Did you know what was going on and what she was?
I mean, I gather because she kept holding the shoulder and I did have closed captions on.
Oh, okay.
So I did get to read some poorly typed out recaps of what they were saying. But I mean, when Dom, stopped her from using the chair, that could have been sold too as, hey, if she uses the chair, she's going to get disqualified. And so Dom is trying to calm her down to say, hey, keep things in, you want that title, don't screw up. And if Dom would have just said, calm down, he's a heel. Because any guy telling a woman to calm down.
Yes, you know exactly what happened. That's a good point. That's a good point. Well, now we're transitioning to that Intercontinental Championship match. And I thought, and again, this would not have worked with the story that they were telling with Gunther winning the world title that we'll get to in a few minutes. But, he's the longest reigning Intercontinental Champion, Gunther was, at 666 days. Honky Tonk Man was the longest reigning Intercontinental Champion and lost it in quick fashion at the first SummerSlam. I thought it would have been kind of cool if they would have delayed the story and had Gunther lose it at SummerSlam, a la Honky Tonk Man,
Mhm.
and it could have still been Braun Breaker, but then you take Sami Zayn out of the equation, and I like Sami. I think he, you know, got a
Mhm.
nice little run there. And then Gunther goes on to win the championship at whatever the event coming up in Germany is. But again, that's just kind of that fantasy booking, and I thought of it last night as we were as the Intercontinental title match was going on. I'm like, oh, you know what? The longest reign came to an end at SummerSlam. It would have been kind of, fun 30 some odd years later, however many years that was. What is it, 36 years later
Mhm.
to do it again? But anyway, I digress. Braun Breaker, though, to me is a stud. I think that he is kind of the future of WWE. Rick and Scott Steiner being, I think he's a hybrid of Rick and Scott. If those two, if they match their DNA and
Mhm.
did, I I think that's
Right.
Braun Breaker. Um, I'm just impressed with him. I've been impressed since he was back in NXT, and I think a lot of people got pissed when he lost the Intercontinental title match previously, but I think SummerSlam all but made up for that moment of him being this hopefully you know real deal,
Mhm.
and that he doesn't get crammed down our throats like Roman Reigns did in the past, and they actually legitimately work him to be moving up that card because he's
Mhm.
still young and has a ton of upside, I think.
Yeah. This is a match that, again, because it was relatively short, I didn't catch all of because I was having conversation at the time and trying to watch and act like I was actually paying attention to the conversation. Because again, when you're talking to women,
Right, right.
you know, but after their match at the last, it was Money in the Bank. Like this one, again, I expected Braun to win,
Mhm.
because the way that he's been built and whatnot. But again, it just seemed, and I blame this more on watching without audio and not fully paying attention, where the ending just felt like it was abrupt, and I
Mhm.
don't know if how many, because I only saw him hit the last spear. I don't know how many spears he'd hit during the match, but um, and we'll talk about this too when we talk about Bailey and Nia Jax, where it's like Sammy won the match, won the Intercontinental title at WrestleMania, and I don't really feel like there's been much done with that title reign. I Part of me still wants to say Chad Gable should have won it, and it would have been more elevating wise for him to be champion than because Sammy has already been multiple time champion.
Mhm.
You know, um, but yeah, no, I agree with what you're saying. Like Braun, I think Braun should be the future of the company. Um, don't shove him down. Let him get there organically.
Mhm.
Don't. Um, but yeah, overall, I mean, good match. There's really, I mean, I think if I go back real quick and look at everything else, I believe this is the only match that didn't have any type of outside. I mean, if you count Seth Rollins being part of an outside factor,
Right,
this
right.
was the only match on the show that didn't have any outside factors
Mhm.
involved,
Yeah.
which is another issue when we wrap up the entire show. It's like the people on the outside were more, I think, took away from matches more than they helped.
Let me ask you one more thing about Braun, and
Yeah.
this is a topic we've talked about for years. Wrestlers being, you know, in character while they're in the ring,
Yeah.
been on social media or in post match interviews and stuff, kind of letting that guard down. I've seen criticism from both sides where when you are a wrestler, you're on if you're on social media as Braun Breaker,
Mm-hmm.
you're on there as Braun Breaker, not Bronson Steiner or Bronson Rick Steiner.
Mm-hmm.
And so don't we don't want to see pictures of you and your girlfriend at the beach.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want to see you kissing puppies and play that
Yeah.
character on social media as well. And obviously we've talked about it before. I noticed it because after and I only watched one quick little clip, but after they had like I think before the media scrum they had uh, the panel back on,
Hmm.
and I don't know the woman's name. I apologize, but she had
Jackie
asked,
Redmond?
"What's that?"
Was it Jackie Redmond?
Probably. Uh,
Okay.
she had asked him about Rick and Scott Steiner being there and watching and what that meant to him, and his, like when he's cutting, he went from like this big hulking, to a very,
Hmm.
you know, articulated answer and talking about the emotion and what that meant to him. And it just made me think, I see it as it's a double-edged sword because
Hmm.
obviously if SummerSlam was a movie premiere and the movie was over and Tom Hanks was there, it's the Tom Hanks movie and Tom Hanks comes out and they start asking him questions. He's going to answer those questions as Tom Hanks and not as
Yeah.
Forrest Gump. And I know I'm using
Although it would have been
very,
better if he'd answered as Forrest Gump, but yes, go on.
but I felt like Rick Steiner was answering that question and not
Hmm.
Braun Breaker. And again, I don't know what the right answer is because I do think social media can be used as an enhancement to help
Hmm.
propel and advance storylines. But then also sometimes it's like, listen, we all know we're in on it.
Yeah.
We get it. So yeah, you can be a human and be a person on social media. So I don't even know why I brought it up.
Well, let me tell you, bro. Bro, what you got is like in the Dominic and Rhea, bro, storyline, bro, is that we all know, bro, that Rhea is married to Buddy
Right.
Murphy, bro, and we know that Dominic is also just got married, bro. So, bro, let me tell you, the story, bro, just does not work.
Yeah. So and
And
that's the thing. It's like I don't know. As a fan, I like seeing some of the behind the scenes
mm,
stuff on social media. So it doesn't bother me, but I know that there are
mm,
some that are out there that are like, I want this to be, have a separate account or whatever. But I don't know. I guess it
mm.
doesn't bother me. Does it bother you, or do you even pay attention to that?
I mean, I don't pay attention that much to wrestling social media, but we've talked about it before, where it's like John Cena is, because it's his real name, is John Cena his entire time. But is it John Cena the wrestler or John Cena the person? And it's
Right.
so I think it's a I mean the issue that wrestling always has. It's why wrestling I think gets criticized for being fake
Mhm.
because people don't separate the actor from the real person. Again, when Tom Hanks or Tom Cruise comes out at the end of the Olympics and does a stunt, we know that's not Ethan Hunt doing the stunt. We know it's going to be Tom Cruise doing the stunt.
Yeah.
But when Braun Breaker hits a move in the ring, well, is that Braun Breaker or is that, like you said, Bronson Rechsteiner? And I don't know. Sadly it's that double edged sword for wrestling, and you just have to go on. But bro, let me tell you, bro, I'm just waiting for the Braun Breaker bro versus Braun Strowman battle for the rights to call themselves Braun, bro.
Hey, did you send it to me, or it might have been Weston, the Hulk Hogan testimony? Speaking of
I
being,
think I sent it to you.
go look it up because it's too.
Hulk Hogan has a 10-inch penis. I don't have a 10-inch penis.
Yeah.
Oh, court cases.
Let me
Um,
tell you something. Yeah, L.A. Knight.
nah.
I like L.A. Knight, but it is kind of we're going back to that conversation earlier about what's old is new again. Is he too much of an Stone Cold Steve Austin and Rock ripoff? And was he like
No.
that in the NWA and in TNA? I didn't watch enough of him in those organizations to know if
Yeah.
this is a carryover of that or is LA Knight a whole different character?
No, I mean, he was Eli Drake. So instead of being L.A. Knight, it was Eli Drake. Yeah. Um, my problem with L.A. Knight, and I'm a fan of his, but it seems like that ship has sailed. Like he was really hot when he came in, and now it's just kind of because nothing has been done with him.
Mhm.
It's just kind of tapered off, and he's still getting big reactions. Don't get me wrong, but it just doesn't feel like the. I think it's more about the sing along aspect of hey, we can do something, and we've talked about it before, where if you have a catchphrase that fans can go along with, they're going to be into your matches more than not.
Yeah.
Um, so, I mean, I'm glad that he won the U.S. title. Good for him. It's probably about 6 months overdue
Yeah.
or a year because everybody wanted him to win Money in the Bank last year. Um, and I've seen stuff, speaking of social media, online where Logan Paul had made some tweets regarding the Olympics the day before, and people are all up in arms about that because, well, that's what social media is made for, is to be offended by everything. But again, going back to what I was saying about the end of Rhea and Dom, is like, the ending was the same ending that we've seen in every other Logan Paul match. His friends get involved, they give him the brass knucks, and then he hits LA Knight with the brass knucks, and then LA Knight just gets up and hits his move and pins him. It's like, it just felt very anticlimactic.
Well, and there were two matches that I will say I got wrong in my predictions, and this was one of them. I thought because it was Logan Paul's hometown, and I think LA Knight beat Logan Paul in a non-title match, or he beat him somewhere else, didn't he, along the way to get to SummerSlam, or something happened.
Yeah.
Maybe he humiliated him. I don't remember what it was. So I had anticipated Logan Paul winning this because the announcers also kept saying, but then when they kept building up of, you know, LA Knight's always come up short. He's got to win the big, this is his opportunity. Then I'm like, I kind of changed my tune, but I agree. And I also wonder, or I think, from my perspective, when they keep giving Logan the brass knucks and the thing, Logan Paul is without a doubt the most talented celebrity to transition into wrestling. I don't think there's you're not going to convince me of anybody else that's done it better. And to me, I almost feel like the brass knucks almost minimizes, because he is so good, he doesn't need that stuff, and they add that, and I don't know if they add that to build up that bad guy heel persona, or why they do it, because I could see if he were not as good or not as crisp that he would need a prop or a crutch or a backup or the support. And again, I know it's all part of the story and whatever, but I just think that it has become an overdone trope for him. And I know he hasn't, people also got pissy on social media that, he's only defended the belt like 10 times or 8 times or what, 2 times. Okay.
Two
So
times.
even worse. But it's like, again, there's no 30-day rule anymore. And it's part of the show. It's part of the act. Get over it if you are pissy that Logan Paul, because then you'd be bitching that Logan Paul's on every week defending the title, and no one else is getting it. So whatever. That's my take on championship title defenses and all that. So the other match that I did not call correctly was Nia Jax and Bayley for the women's championship. I had anticipated Bayley winning, it going down the way it did, basically, where Bayley gets her ass kicked most of the match. Bayley retains, and then Tiffy cashes in and wins the championship, and then sets up a struggle between her and Nia because Tiffany took advantage of the beatdown of Bayley. That's how I thought it was going to end. And I actually thought even after it ended that Tiffany was going to waffle Nia with the briefcase and somehow pull off a win. But I'll be curious to see where they go with this storyline. I like Tiffany Stratton a lot for many reasons, but I do think that she, again, kind of like Braun Breaker, I think that she has that potential to be a future superstar for a long time. She's young and she's athletic, and she can definitely get into that character mode. I think that people love to hate.
Yeah, and I think the story. I mean, I expected Bayley to win, just because I don't think this is going to be harsh, but between you and me, neither one of us really wants to see Nia Jax.
Right.
But that's a personal thing.
Yeah.
Personal preference. But I guess, the story with Tiffy and Nia being buddy, and Nia giving her the new Money in the Bank briefcase and saying, okay, I'm going to give this to you, but you can't use it on me, now sets up that storyline for.
I missed that part of
I think that was on SmackDown. Yeah.
Okay. I missed the first half of SmackDown. So okay.
Okay. So the story makes, but and again, like I said with Sami Zayn earlier. Bailey, since winning the title at Mania, just hasn't felt like that much of a factor in the storyline. So I'm I'm not upset. Bailey won or lost. It is what it is. And again, storyline. It's all storyline driven.
It is very story driven. Another big storyline driven match: Drew McIntyre versus Seth Rollins. I'm sorry, versus CM Punk with Seth Rollins as the special guest referee. They pointed out, they noted the SummerSlam has had special guest referees. The very first one was Jesse Ventura.
Mm.
He was back in '99 refereeing the main event matches. You had, of course, Shawn Michaels, The Undertaker, and Bret Hart in that story. That's where I think they were most closely kind of tying all this in together.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, because allegedly, all three men don't like each other. I thought it was good. I was honestly concerned for Punk, just thinking, is he going to be, let's face it, and I'm not making fun or criticizing the guy. He's in his mid 40s. Our bodies change as we get older. We're more, injuries and all this stuff. And there are some guys that are in there doing it and defying it. And apparently, I read somewhere that Dory Funk may have a match at
Yeah.
81 or 82 or however old he is. So, I'm not criticizing Punk at all, but I was concerned that, a wrong move, you get hit the wrong way and you're back on the shelf. And so that concerned me. But I think I don't know, the friendship bracelet thing.
Dude, it's 2024. A Taylor Swifty friendship bracelet had to be the focus of the match.
I don't know, man. I just thought it was so, like, knowing Punk.
Yeah.
To me, it didn't work in that. And I don't, and this is going to come off sounding completely sexist, but had that been in a women's championship match, I could have bought more into that. But with Punk, and I know he loves his wife and he loves his dog. I
Yeah.
would have even bought it more, I think, with Cody, because they've incorporated Cody's wife
Yeah.
and dog into
Yeah.
the storyline. But
Yeah. But if you ask Jack Perry, he'll tell you CM Punk's a little bitch. So we're my issue with the match is, I mean, this has probably been the best built match of the entire card.
yeah,
And Drew and Punk hate each other.
yeah,
And they go out and have a match. Like, I didn't feel the hatred that they've built up over the last 6 months.
yeah,
It was just a normal match. And then, when the friendship bracelet was on the ground, Seth picked it up and put it on. And then Punk's like doing his move and then notices it and just stops and puts McIntyre down. Is like, you got my bracelet. All Seth again had to do was say, like, dude, I just picked it up. He could have taken it off and handed it to Punk and been like, look, it's your, I just didn't want it to get broken. So I felt like that the last 10% of the match, that hatred or animosity between them, all three, felt fake. It felt like it's like, we have to put this into the match to get to the ending. It just, again, so this match, this was probably like the biggest disappointment match on the show because of the expectation going in of the hatred. And I do think, they pointed out, like you said, the 1997 special referee match. And I think they did that, as we were saying earlier, where even though it was 27 years ago, it still feels kind of fresh. So you can be like, hey, we know we've done this before. And we're going to, have the little spot where Seth goes to hit Punk and almost hits Drew. That's like a callback to that match.
yeah.
Okay, we've got that out of the way. Now we can get on with the rest of the match without fans expecting that spot. But overall, what's that?
No, go ahead.
Oh, I just, this was just a disappointing. And I've seen speculation that they were working kind of soft because they didn't want Punk to get injured again in his first match, which may be the case. Whatever. But I expected Drew to win because that keeps the story, again, as I think this episode was brought to us by the word storyline, that keeps the storyline going, and we'll see where they go next. And I think McIntyre needed the win more than Punk.
I agree. And then, speaking of McIntyre and Punk and their relationship, what are your thoughts? What's your takeaway of the photo that Drew tweeted, and I think deleted it later, but of or I guess posted on X, not tweeted anymore. But
Mm-hmm.
anyway, of him and Jungle Jack Perry or Jack Perry, whatever his
The scapegoat.
yeah, the scapegoat. I thought at first it was Photoshop, but apparently it was a legit photo. Um, was he forced to remove that? Was that part
Mm-hmm.
of it? I felt like it's all kind of part of the story, and we're all being worked along the way.
Worked.
What was your takeaway from that?
One, I was just curious where they ran into each other.
Right, that's what I'm like. Where were they? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think maybe it's a little too inside baseball
Hmm.
because it's like you have to know the AEW storyline. And, we've discussed many times here on the show where I think AEW fans, a good portion of them watch WWE. I
Right.
don't think a lot of WWE fans watch AEW.
Right.
And so if you don't, and I even saw, this YouTuber, his name, I'll give him a shout out, not that he's watching and anything, but his name is Deporticus. I've started watching his videos. He's entertaining. He's only been watching wrestling since WrestleMania 39. And so like a lot of his videos are like getting into it and asking questions. And I saw he posted on Twitter, on X as well. He put the picture. He's like, who is this? What am I missing here? You
Mm.
know, something like that. And so I think, that's the case. It's like, so again, maybe Drew deleted it because no one got the joke, or the reference, but I don't know. I mean, in 3 years when Jack Perry's contract is up and Tony Khan forgets that he's even wrestling there anymore, we'll see Jungle Jack come back and team up with CM Punk and WWE to win the tag titles.
He was at SummerSlam. What was it? 2013,
2013, yeah. I think
somewhere,
2013, yeah.
in LA. So, um, Gunther versus the world champion Damian Priest. No disrespect to anyone involved. I feel like this world championship, it was established just over a year ago or whatever it was when Seth Rollins won it. To me, it just feels less than. It's almost like the IC titles Big Brother.
Mhm.
It doesn't feel like world championship stuff to me. And I don't know if that's because they have put so much energy and focus on that Universal champion. When Roman was both champions, and then Brock Les. You have Brock Lesnar and Roman Reigns, and now Cody Rhodes, and then again, no disrespect to Damian Priest, but it's like I just didn't feel like he was on that same plane as those guys. Gunther versus Damian Priest would not have closed out SummerSlam or any pay per view, in my opinion. And
That's a main event in any arena.
I just don't see that championship being revered enough to be a show closer. So especially when you have a dual event like this, and I don't know if they're going back to the Raw and SmackDown style pay per views. I don't feel like they have yet, or PLEs. To me, it just this match or this championship just does not have the significance that previous world champions have had.
Yeah, I mean, I think the title itself is fine, but I don't think Damian Priest
Mhm.
was built up enough before winning the title, and especially since he won on a cash in of the Money in the Bank, which after several unsuccessful attempts at cashing in, and I think that hurt Damian Priest as well, because he to me was never presented as a championship material
Right.
or a contender. And I think he's done well since winning the title. And I look forward to his matches more than I would have thought I would, but I still saw him as a transitional champ.
Yeah.
And, but I thought the match was fine. And I thought that he held his own with Gunther. Gunther is also someone that I'm not overly like excited about. And I understand why fans are, and I understand why I should be, but he just doesn't resonate with me.
Dude, I'm the same way. When it came down to him and Cody at the end of the Rumble, what,
2 years
almost
ago
now? I felt the same way, and when he was in NXT, and he's impressive. 870 days as NXT UK champion and 666 days as Intercontinental champion, the
Mm,
longest reigning champion of two different title reigns. It's impressive. He's good in the ring,
mm,
and but there is something missing with him, and I don't know what it is. I don't know if he needs a manager, a mouthpiece, someone else to kind of be a heater
mm,
for him. I don't know what it is, but yeah, I just, for me as a fan, there's something missing with him, and
mm,
I'm curious to see if we just mentioned these two impressive title reigns. Does this
mm.
become the third? Is he going to be, and
Yeah.
then maybe bring some stability and credibility to that championship? Because I know it's a real. I know there's always been a world champion, but this is a newer concept, I think, that they're trying to do with it.
Mm.
And we talked earlier, and I guess we can get to Roman Reigns here as well. But you know, with this Netflix deal that starts in January.
January.
Also, I want to know, is Raw and SmackDown going to be on USA until then? Because I
Yes.
know USA or SmackDown starts on USA in
In
September.
September. Yeah, they worked out a deal to keep Raw on through the end of the year.
Okay. Are they going to keep SmackDown on Friday nights on USA?
I believe so.
I'm just curious, where are the eyeballs going to be? Does Netflix? I've heard Netflix wants Roman Reigns, for example, but then championship wise, because I think we saw this when when SmackDown went to Fox back
Mm-hmm.
4 or 5 years ago, when Brock Lesnar decimated Kofi Kingston in 9 seconds and won the belt. I think that was partly a demand from Fox that Brock is on their
Mm-hmm.
show, and so these network demands, and I know they're paying millions of dollars, and that, again, you don't become a $1 billion corporation with
Mm.
by not doing some of these things that maybe fans don't always agree with, but I just don't see a Gunther led Raw being something that fans are going to buy Netflix or subscribe to Netflix to
Mm.
watch. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't. I'm curious to see how Raw does on Netflix. And again, streaming platforms don't release numbers unless they're like really great.
Mhm.
So the weekly, internet trend of overreacting to ratings, it's going to be interesting to see because if you can't get the numbers from Netflix, are you, how are you going to brag or talk shit about
Mhm.
Raw? So we'll see. I mean, I think Raw has enough star power outside of Gunther. Right, if they keep things the way they are, and I think everyone is still waiting for Jey Uso to win the title. We'll see if that gets built up. I am firmly no yeet, but that's not against Jay. That's just against me hating popular slang because, again, old. Yeah, but going back to this match, again, outside interference or outside shenanigans that played more of a role, I think, in the match than the match itself. And, we'll have to tune into Raw to see how the whole Judgment Day implosion plays out. And I just, Finn Balor is one half of the tag champions. So why?
Okay, I didn't realize that. So
Yeah,
yeah,
he
who
he,
are the
he and
tag
J,
teams on
he and
Raw?
JD McDonough won the
Okay,
tag titles from whoever had them. Um,
Awesome Truth.
awesome truth, yeah. Um, so yeah, we'll see how that plays out. But yeah, I mean, the match was again, it's fine, it's good, it was serviceable. Will I need to go back and rewatch it anytime soon? No.
And here's where I also want to make a comment. And you and I, again, this is
Mhm.
a conversation through us throughout the dawn of time with wrestling, is
Yeah.
trying to apply logic to an illogical situation. If I'm Finn Balor and I've always wanted to be world champion,
Mm-hmm.
why would I screw my buddy out of the belt to get it to a guy that is bigger, stronger, tougher,
Mm-hmm.
more established than I am.
Yeah.
Why would I not help him win and then turn on him and challenge him and go for the belt?
I had the same thought because, yeah, because you figure this will lead to a Balor versus Damian Priest feud.
Yeah.
Wouldn't Balor want to be champion, especially since he won the Universal title and then had to give it up
Yeah.
24 hours later?
Yeah. That's what I'm like, man,
Yeah.
make this make sense. And again, we're trying to apply logic to an illogical situation, but I just think that obviously, storyline wise, they're going in a different direction with Gunther and does Damian Priest turn into a Jack Swagger? I think sometimes he's becomes my example of a guy that wins the gold and then kind of falls off and into oblivion. When he won the title from Chris Jericho and then he just kind of disappeared down the card once he lost it back. So
yeah, but I will say Jack Swagger eventually got a cool hat.
But I mean, I think that's part of the problem too, and this is probably a topic for another day, but that's part of the problem with the Money in the Bank. Sometimes they give it to an established guy like a Brock Lesnar or a Randy Orton, and then sometimes they give it to someone that they want to give that shine to. I personally am happy that the cash in already happened for this year, so we don't have that year-long story of is he going to cash in or isn't he? We're going to get that with women, but I think it'll work with that case.
Yeah, I was going to mention that during that match too. It's like I am so over the Money in the Bank
concept.
Every concept, yeah, and especially now you have two. Especially now that you have two of them.
Yeah,
it's like okay because it is the I'm going to cash in. Oh no, I'm not. Oh, I am no. And it seems like whoever wins the Money in the Bank goes on a losing streak, and then cashes in and wins, and you're like supposed to treat them like a champion because they have the title.
Right. Yeah.
So
I think that's what hurt Damian Priest too. But
yeah.
Okay, our main event, it's Bloodline Rules. Probably the biggest surprise of the night, Arn Anderson. Seeing him backstage.
Just roaming around backstage like Joe Biden, wandering around like, where am I?
I used to listen to the Arn podcast and he was not very complimentary of WWE in his time there. I know that he left under some maybe not so great circumstances originally as a trainer or a producer or whatever they call him now. He was a big part of AEW for a while there and was Cody's manager, which I never really bought into, but I get it. I knew you weren't watching live during SummerSlam. Tyler was, so we were texting back and forth, and I had said, because Arn made a comment about having friends there, and I said, God, I hope this doesn't mean that Brock Anderson is coming out to help Cody. Because up until last night, I didn't realize it was Bloodline Rules again. So
again, that was made on SmackDown.
Okay, again, I missed that part of that SmackDown. So once they established that, I'm like, okay, I know.
You could take a nap for.
I did know at SmackDown. I knew at the end of SmackDown they said something about it when the other two won the tag team title. So yeah, so I knew it was coming. But anyway, I wondered who was going to debut or not debut, but be a part.
Be the friends.
Yeah, who the friends were going to be. I had kind of forgotten about that. So.
Oh yeah, and it was shocking, like the guys that he's been teaming with for the last month.
Right.
It was like, I mean, I think it would have been better, given the AEW history, if he would have given him a gun and said, "Here, take them out." And again, you and I talked about this prior to this recording. Bloodline to me is NWO Wolfpack versus NWO Black and White right now. It is so uninteresting to me because it's the same thing week after week. The first, again, according to Wikipedia, the match went 29 minutes and 10 seconds. The first 25 minutes, pointless because you were just waiting for Bloodline to come in. You were waiting for the run-ins. Why, since it was Bloodline Rules, again, making logic out of an illogical situation, why didn't the entire Bloodline just attack Cody right at the beginning and beat him down? Why did they wait? And then, we all got the return that still makes no sense to me. I mean, let me rephrase. The return makes sense. The fan reaction doesn't make sense to me. But with the tribal chief coming back.
And why don't you think it makes sense?
because Roman was top heel until he lost the title. He's been gone. He's done nothing to change that persona, but the fans have changed into wanting him. Even though when he comes back, he'll still probably only show up once every 2 months or so.
Well, absence makes the heart grow fonder. I think with them taking out, they being the bloodline, taking out
Mm-hmm.
Paul Heyman, all of those little things, I think,
Mm-hmm.
were seeds being planted to get Roman that reaction. Um, how could we make the current bloodline better? Jacob Fatu is an amazing talent. He's, was high praises
Yeah.
on the indie scene, or MLW and some of the other companies he was working
Mm-hmm.
for. And I don't know all of the. I know the other
Um,
two are Haku's kids,
mm-hmm.
Tama Tonga. I think
Yeah, sure.
the guy with the eye patch, is that a legit injury, or is he just kind of channeling his inner pirate?
Yeah, I thought Rocky Romero had jumped ship from AEW when I saw him come out with the eye patch. I was like, so I mean, that's new to me. I don't know why, but yeah, my feeling with this bloodline is not that they don't have the talent. It's as we've said before, Solo Sikoa was a chump during the last 6. Other than beating John Cena,
Right.
he wasn't presented as a credible threat. He was just the heater to
Hmm.
help Roman win matches,
Yeah.
but he wasn't winning matches on his own.
Yeah.
And now he's taken over. And then you get three guys that the audience doesn't know.
Yeah.
Again, if I watch New Japan Wrestling, might be familiar with them,
Right.
and if when they came in, if I got a video package telling me who they are, which is something that, it gets AEW gets a lot of criticism for. It's just like, oh, you have these guys show up from Japan or CMLL and we don't know who they are. And it's like, well, that's, that's true. I mean, that's the case, but I don't, and again, the bloodline saga has been going on for 3-4 years now. It's just, once again, going back again, as another theme of the show, again, it was the NWO. I've seen it. I've been there. I got the t-shirt, literally. Got the NWO t-shirt at Starcade 96, but I don't need a bloodline. I'm tired of the bloodline. And the bloodline is the main focus on SmackDown without being in the orbit of anybody else in SmackDown. So it seems like you're either in the main or you're nothing, somewhat, or at least what Judgment Day has on Raw has kind of ebbed and flowed with other wrestlers. But the bloodline just seems to be about the blood. It's all about Roman. And, I think Roman is now Poochie. It's like when Roman's not on screen, everyone should talk about Roman and when he's coming back. So yeah, again, this is just me. I don't like it. I've gone over on this show before. I don't think Cody is the top draw. I think he is a top draw in the fans' eyes. I don't see him as top draw wrestler wise.
I think that there are things they could have done differently with
Mm-hmm.
Cody's reign so far. But I do think, like you said, merchandise sales and the fan reaction,
Mm-hmm.
he is this generation's John Cena.
Yeah.
And, the mainstream, and we talked about this too, I don't see Solo Sikoa going on the Today Show and being, that mouthpiece or that representation for WWE.
Yeah.
So, in that regard, and I think that it was an interesting time before Cody won the belt because he was kind of being that mouthpiece and doing those kind of media things before he became the champion, and now he's the champion. So it all ultimately, I think, makes sense. But I do hope that they work on, because in the '80s, Hulk Hogan had a heel factory of big nasty heels, and
Mm-hmm.
Paul Orndorff and Roddy Piper and Dr. D. David Schultz, and then Big John Studd and King Kong Bundy. It was a variety of opponents that were dastardly nasty heels.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I don't think Cody has been afforded that same heel factory of
Mm-hmm.
sorts. So I hope, if they're going to keep the belt with him and do some things, I'm hoping we see something different. But like you said, the headline coming out of SummerSlam is the return of Roman Reigns, not Cody Rhodes retains Universal Championship.
Mhm.
And so I'll be curious to see where they go with these two if they do have another match. How does The Rock factor back into this? Does the bloodline, are we going to get Roman's bloodline versus Solo's bloodline? And if we do, again, they need to work their butts off of making Solo's bloodline feel, because I think Roman watching, it almost feels like Roman could go in and destroy all of those guys.
Mhm.
And so we need some work. And now Jacob Fatu, we saw it. I actually asked
Mhm.
Tyler, do you think he's legitimately hurt? Because the way he reacted afterward seemed like, I'm frustrated. I can't get up and I can't
Mhm.
continue here. I, as of this recording on Sunday morning, we don't know anything official, but I did see right before we started recording a video from a fan. He ran into the bloodline at a convenience store or gas station or something, and Jacob Fatu is wearing a boot. So
Mhm.
how injured he is, we don't know. What factors this will take. That's the good thing about the bloodline, though, of having all these extra players, is you almost get that freebird rules when it comes to the tag titles, for example, maybe, so they don't have to necessarily interrupt the story in that regard. But we'll see. But yeah, I agree. I do think it has become a long overplayed thing. Maybe the new bloodline gets a mouthpiece like Paul Heyman, because I can't imagine Paul Heyman coming back and not being with Roman. I don't know. It just feels less than, and I can't as a fan buy into, at least with the Wolf Pack versus the Black and White.
Mhm.
We had Hall and Nash, and then Hogan, and I don't know who else was part of that. But anyway, it felt a
Sting,
little
Luger, yeah,
it felt a little more even, um, to an
playing
extent,
field.
an even playing field. Right now with the Bloodline, I just don't feel it. And again, I think it happened too fast. I could have waited until Survivor, but maybe Survivor Series we're going to get a War Games match with the
Mhm.
two bloodlines. But I could have waited for Roman's return. I know a lot of fans were ready for it. It's only been 3 months. I could have gone a little longer, uh, and waited for it to be a bit more impactful, because this bloodline storyline's been going on for 3 years or 4 years, and now I feel like we hit fast forward to get Roman back into the story. So
Yeah, and like I said, it also took away from Cody.
right.
It's Cody is the afterthought here, and if that's going to be your champion and finishing the story, now his post championship run just feels like the end of the third Lord of the Rings movie, where it just goes on and on forever, or not necessarily forever. It's only been 4 months, but it goes on and on with no point. So
Well, and I'm really hoping that Roman's motivation to come back is for the tribal chief and not for the
the
championship.
time.
So then that gives him a story to do in the meantime,
Mm-hmm.
and we can focus on Cody. So we could still have two top of the card stories going
Yeah,
on and
yeah,
give Cody some emphasis and some focus. I'm still waiting for that Randy Orton turn. So maybe that happens down the road here too. So
yeah.
I know you can't wait for that.
I've got my I love Randy shirt ready to go. Um, yeah,
Anything
yeah.
else you want to add before we're turning this into an AEW pay-per-view style?
Again, I mean, I have accepted the fact that WWE shows are not. I am not the target audience. I am not the necessary. It's. I think the wrestling is good. I like the wrestlers. The presentation just falls flat for me most of the time, and that's how I felt with SummerSlam. The matches were good. The action was good. The overall stories just left me feeling. But my biggest question is, how do you do a show in Cleveland and not have WWE Hall of Famer Drew Carey make an appearance?
Oh wow, yeah. Hmm.
Baffling.
Something to ponder. Getting well down in his own town. All right, Chad, thank you for being a part of this week's episode. We want to hear from you, so weigh in. Let us know your thoughts. Check out the My123Cents Facebook group and the Facebook page, and let us know what is on your mind. Thanks for watching and or listening. Have a great week, and we will talk again soon.